Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom, and I'm your weekly horoscope columnist here on Astrology Hub. And today I wanted to talk to you about that cosmic game of bumper cars that's going on upstairs in the sky. Let's see, what do we have going on right now? I think we have a Venus retrograde, a lunar eclipse in Virgo, Mercury retrograde, the Sun's last conjunction to Neptune in the zodiac sign of Pisces, then the Sun enters Aries, then there's a solar eclipse in Aries, and finally, Neptune follows the Sun into the astrological sign of Aries. Now, I can completely understand if any of you out there just want to go and find a place to hide during this entire cosmic Lollapalooza, for lack of a better way of putting it. There are so many things going on in the sky all at once. We've got, and the impact that it's having on us here below on Earth. We've got on again, off again truces. We've got on again, off again trade wars. We have on again, off again tariffs. And you really don't know what's up, what's down, what's coming, or what's going. But again, all of this can be tied to the planets in the sky. And it's very much a temptation to sort of say, okay, everything's gone crazy and just hide out or duck and cover, and that's going to be it. But it's an astrologer's job to really isolate every one of the planetary aspects and try to interpret what's going on and hopefully give some kind of guidance. I find that when I go through difficult times in my life, yes, my first response is always to feel overwhelmed, that what's going on is too big, it's too much for me to manage or even wrap my head around. But then there are those moments where you sort of take a couple of steps back and you're like, okay, let's break this down into pieces. Let's break this down into easily mentally digestible parts so that we can begin to sort of understand what's going on. And that's again what I'm hopefully trying to do today. I'm not saying that I've got the answers, but maybe if we understand the different pieces of the puzzle, we can put those pieces together and then make some sense of the picture that emerges. The first thing that I want to share with you is this phrase. It comes from Aristotle or Plotinus. It's not really quite clear who first said it, but it is astra inclinant sed non obligant. Again, that's astra inclinant sed non obligant, which basically means the stars incline, but they do not compel. And I want you to think about that for a moment. The stars incline, but they do not compel. We're used to sort of thinking of astrology in terms of like fate, in terms of, the stars up there are not getting along with one another, and so we're going to have stormy seas, or the stars are getting along with one another and things will be nice. But even for those of us who still see the stars as in movement, there are still many people who regard astrology as a fixed fate. That, the stars just say what it's going to be and you're going to have to deal with it, or something along those lines. But it's nice to know that as early as Aristotle and Plotinus, there was this notion that the stars can incline, they can influence, okay, but they don't compel. They don't make you do anything that you don't want to do. All right. And this was their very sort of light way of introducing free will, or the notion of free will, and really more along the lines of reminding us of free will. Now, is there such a thing as free will? Not really. When you think about all the environmental conditions and economic conditions and things like that, people's wills aren't really as free as they would like them to be. But what we do have is freedom of choice. We can choose where we want to go. We can choose what we're going to deal with. We may not have complete, wide range of choices. There are going to be days in which it's one or two choices and that's it. Okay. But even at those times when we feel like we have no choice, there are choices if you stop to look and examine the picture that's going on. So let's let's begin with the first bumper car. And I like the image of saying cosmic bumper car going on in the sky, because it seems like no sooner does one planet move forward than another planet has retrograded and moves backwards, and another one's moving backwards and curving on in. And it's almost like each of the planets are sort of hitting one another and bumping one another in the sky. So let's take a couple of steps back and really sort of examine what's going on here. I'm going to be throwing some aspects in your direction and hopefully describing them in such a way that you can follow what I'm saying, that it doesn't feel so overwhelming. My point here today is to make all of this less overwhelming, and so you can sort of follow what's going on here. But the first planet that we're going to want to pay attention to is Mars. Mars was named after the Roman god of war, and it's the ruling planet of the zodiac sign Aries. So Mars is pretty much about fighting. It's about combat. It's about upsetting things. Okay, so everything dealing with contests and competition are associated with Mars, and also fights, resistance, and struggle are all associated to the planet Mars. Mars likes to cause a ruckus, and Mars likes to be loud and boisterous. So the first planet of our bumper car scenario that we're dealing with is Mars. And Mars sort of begins the whole snowball effect when it turns retrograde in the zodiac sign of Leo on December 6th of 2024. I've talked about that before on this show. I think maybe a couple of episodes ago about Mars turning retrograde and having come out of retrograde. Well, Mars turned retrograde in the zodiac sign of Leo, which is ruled by the sun, on December 6th, 2024. Mars turned direct. That means it came out of retrograde. A retrograde is when the planet appears to be moving backwards in the sky. And so there's a backwards motion in a retrograde, like you either regress or you return to, or something has been thrown in the works that messes up your best laid plans. And now, you have to deal with that. So Mars retrograde was moving backwards. It was regressing in the sky. It moves down into the zodiac sign of Cancer, where it comes out of retrograde on February 23rd. And that's all you pretty much have to remember, is that Mars is now moving direct or forward in the sky in the zodiac sign of Cancer, but it's got to get back to the point where it turned retrograde, which was in the zodiac sign of Leo. Okay, Mars is connected to fight and combat, struggle and difficulty. Mars is direct in the sky right now, so that's the idea that you want to keep in mind. Now, on March 1st, Venus turned retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aries. Okay, so what you want to keep in mind here is that Venus is named after the Roman goddess of love and beauty. Venus rules over treaties, truces, contracts, and pledges. Okay, so whenever you form an agreement with someone, that is going to be ruled by Venus. All right, so Venus is about an agreement that you're forming with someone to form an alliance or a love affair or a relationship or a partnership. These are all things that Venus rules over, all right? So when Venus turned retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aries, what you want to keep in mind here is Aries. Okay, well, Aries is ruled by Mars, which is named after the Roman god of war. So when Venus entered Aries, there was already a sort of warlike or dissenting or not going to be harmonious aspect to her. But then when she turned retrograde in Aries on March 1st, that's when she basically pulled back her powers of harmony, peace, and people getting along. So what happens with the Venus retrograde when she moves backwards in the sky is that I found over the years that I've been practicing astrology is that she revokes, okay, what we expect from her. We expect from Venus peace, love, and harmony. What happens when Venus turns retrograde? She revokes the peace. She revokes the love, and she revokes the harmony. Okay, so that if you don't say please, or if you don't say thank you, you can cause a lot of trouble. All right, Venus is the planet of etiquette. It's the planet, she's the planet of courtesy. She's the planet of good manners. And so when she revokes the peace, the harmony, and then when you sort of trespass or go against Venus, which is you don't practice good etiquette, you don't practice good manners, those things can flare up. And if you remember what took place on March 1st, it was the demand for gratitude and a resistance to give the gratitude that created all of that trouble. Okay, so that's very Venus turning retrograde, and then it was dealing with the prospect of war because she's in the zodiac sign of Aries. Okay, so that's the thing to keep in mind there. So Venus isn't so much about fighting, okay, that she's retrograde. Venus has removed the things that have restrained fighting, okay? So if you remove trust, if you remove a truce, if you remove a treaty, what happens? People are free to, people who are feeling animus towards one another, anger at one another, not liking one another, they're free to go and have, I don't know, a food fight in the cafeteria might be a good way of putting it. So that's what took place during that period of time. So Venus is retrograde from March 1st until April 12th. Okay. So what do we do to work with that energy, with Venus going retrograde in that regard? What we want to do is no matter how much we're being provoked, because Venus is in Aries, which is a Mars-ruled sign, no matter how much we might feel provoked or that someone's poking us in the ribs or someone's looking for a fight or saying all these nasty things, we want to practice Venus. Okay, Venus might have revoked her powers and her influence, but the best way to counteract it is to practice Venus. You want to practice good etiquette. You want to practice good manners. You want to observe protocol, all right? Because if you don't do that during the period of time that Venus is retrograde, which is March 1st until April 12th, then you could find yourself in some very, very difficult situations. So the more that you can reach out, the more that you can practice good manners, etiquette, the more that you can make yourself available or that you're looking for some kind of peace, the more that you can advertise, I'm not looking for a fight here, okay? This is what you want to do during this period of time that Venus is moving backwards in the sky. Venus's retrograde was followed by a lunar eclipse in Virgo, which took place on March 14th. All right, so a lunar eclipse eclipses are very powerful, okay, because they're really going to talk about dramatic changes in direction. Eclipses really sort of bring this tremendous bolt of energy forward. And what happens, like with a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse, is that the two lights in the sky, that's what they were called by the ancients. The sun lights the day, the moon lights the night. The two lights in the sky are eclipsed, they are overshadowed. In the case of a lunar eclipse, the lunar eclipses take place when there's a full moon, when the sun is opposite the moon. And because the moon reflects the sun's light, she is the brightest, she is the most lit, okay, at night on a full moon. But during a lunar eclipse, the shadow of the Earth, the shadow of the Earth moves between the sun and the moon. Basically, the Earth moves between the sun and the moon, and it casts its shadow on the moon so that the moon turns red. Okay, it turns ruddy and it turns red, and it's been eclipsed. In ancient times, this was a very frightening thing. Okay, you have to remember this is way before electricity. Okay, and people are looking at the nighttime sky, and there was an insistence that the lights in the sky behave. That there was an expectation, that the sun rises on a new day. That's a good thing. That the moon goes through its phases, and on a full moon it shows its light. That's a good thing. So when that didn't happen, that was cause for great crisis. That was cause for great concern, and it still is to this day. So when we have a lunar eclipse in the zodiac sign of Virgo, okay, the sun is in Pisces right now. We're in March, the sun is in Pisces right now. So the moon is in its opposite sign, which is Virgo, and it's being eclipsed. What happens is that things that are pertinent to Virgo become they become powerful. They're unleashed, but it's almost like shadow Virgo is like unleashed on the planet, on us here below. A solar eclipse always dealt with a public figure, and a lunar eclipse always dealt with the people, the body politic. The moon rules the body in astrology, and when you're looking at eclipses, which were used a lot to predict the fate of nations, for lack of a better way of putting it, the lunar eclipse always dealt with the body politic, with the people. It was something that, was there going to be a famine? Was there going to be pestilence? These were things that were asked during lunar eclipses, things that could have a negative effect on the land and on the people. And if, we had natural disasters or things of that sort having a negative effect on the land and the people, well, then that would upset government. That would upset the smooth running of things. So when there's a lunar eclipse in the zodiac sign of Virgo, what do we know of Virgo? Virgo is the sign of work, health, and service. All right. Okay, so we would be wondering, is there going to be something eclipsed? Is a shadow going to fall on the areas of work, health, and service? All right. Are there going to be things that are shaken up and things that are distressed and things that are disturbed? And so we look to the workers. We work to the people who perform services. We may even look to bureaucracy. Actually, we're absolutely going to look towards bureaucracy because Virgo is ruled by Mercury, which is the planet of the scribe. Scribes were the people who took down what the king said, okay, back in Sumer. Okay, they would take down, they would write exactly what the king said so that the king would remember it, and that if the king made a rule or a law, it was written down, and so this was going to be the rule and the law. Scribes were people who counted things. They counted the money. They counted cattle. They made an accounts of things, and they were responsible for the smooth running of a government. You could have a king on a throne at a court, but who's going to run the government? Okay, if everyone's like showing up and listening to the king and the king's sitting on the throne and talking, who's going to run the government? Who's going to send the messages of the king? Who's going to record sales and purchases that are going on? Those were the scribes. And so those scribes are Mercury. Okay, Mercury rules over anyone who takes account, who writes, who speaks, basically anyone who is a messenger, all right? And that comes from Hermes being connected to the Roman god Mercury. Hermes was the messenger god of Zeus. If Zeus wanted to send a message to someone, Hermes was like, I'm on it, and like went and told them that. So Hermes was basically the Twitter of ancient Greece, or the Instagram messaging of ancient Greece. And indeed, those social medias are ruled by Mercury. And so that's also going to be affected by this lunar eclipse in Virgo. So we deal with the zodiac sign that's being eclipsed, which is Virgo, which is the common folk, okay, the worker. We also know that Virgo is the zodiac sign of women. All right. So it's the only zodiac sign that really portrays a woman. So we know that it's going to impact women. And then it's also impacting messaging, buying and selling, and probably bureaucracy, and probably teachers, people who also teach as well. Okay, so this is being impacted with the eclipse. A shadow is being thrown over the smooth functioning of these things. And as the moon's light turns ruddy and red, and darkens in the sky and is cause for concern and upset, that is what's going on in the land below as a result of this. And that is the lunar eclipse taking place on March 14th, 2025. Then we go to March 15th, okay, the day after the lunar eclipse, and that is when Mercury, remember Mercury, the planet of scribes, of messengers, of bureaucracy, even people who instruct or teach or train, Mercury who makes things happen, in government, or in trade, in economies. Mercury turns retrograde. So again, to break it down, we've got a lunar eclipse taking place in the zodiac sign of Virgo. Virgo is ruled by Mercury, and on the day after the lunar eclipse, which is March 14th, the day after is March 15th, and that is when Mercury turns retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aries. So we just had a bumper car move backwards, a bumper car just sort of like stay in the middle, and then another bumper car move backwards into it, and everyone's kind of like slamming into one another here, all right? So Mercury has turned retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aries. Just to remind you here, what other planet is retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aries, all right? Venus. Venus is retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aries right now, okay? So we know that Aries is important. Now we have a second planet that's turned retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aries, and that planet is Mercury. Mercury and Venus have a lot in common, all right? They really, really do. The first thing that they have in common is that in our solar system, they're the only two planets that orbit inside the orbit of the Earth, okay? All the other planets are outside the orbit of the Earth. And even if you want to invoke the moon, which in astrology is regarded as a planet, the moon orbits around the Earth, and so it goes inside the orbit of the Earth and outside the orbit of the Earth and inside. Okay, so the moon is not strictly inside the orbit of the Earth. Mercury and Venus are. Mercury and Venus are also the two very social planets, okay? Venus is named after the Roman goddess of love and beauty, and Mercury's named after the Roman god of messengers, of messaging. And so they both talk to people. They're both very one-on-one in their types of dynamics. We talked about how Venus retrograde is broken troth, it's broken truce, it's broken trust, it's broken treaty, all right, the pledges, all right? So Mercury, who in Latin, the root of Mercury is merc, and that's where we get our word merchant and merchandise and mercantile. Mercury is in charge of buying and selling. That's what Mercury does. Venus is packaging. Okay, so Venus like packages something and makes it look alluring and beautiful, seductive, and like, oh my God, I want to buy that. Okay, but Mercury is the one who's selling it. All right, so Mercury is in charge of buying and selling, and Mercury moves retrograde. It starts moving backwards on March 15th, and so that means that buying and selling gets kind of messed up. Okay, it gets kind of fouled up. That purchases aren't going through in the way that they should be, and that one expects them to. So traditionally, astrologers will say you shouldn't do any buying or selling during the period of time that Mercury is retrograde. And Mercury is retrograde from March 15th until April 7th. Okay, so the understanding is no buying, no selling during that period of time. It's not a good idea. Deals will fall down or go south or not come through, and just you don't want to risk it. Well, that sounds great if you're not living in the real world, all right? But the fact of the matter is we live in a world of constant commerce. Okay, so we can't take time off to stop buying and selling or something along those lines. This is a regular way that we live our lives. So how do we navigate this period of time when Mercury is retrograde, this period of time when Mercury is retrograde from March 15th until April 7th? Well, what you want to do is that you want to be careful, about what you're purchasing or what you're beginning. But you also want to be really, you want to scrutinize, okay? If there is a contract that is being set up, you want to go over the wording of that contract. Venus may rule over pledges and contracts and agreements, but when you get with Mercury, you're getting into the wording of that contract. You're getting into the wording of that pledge. You're getting into the wording of that agreement. And you also want to examine the clauses, the addendums, the things that are being added to, and also the things that have been left out. Okay, these are all the things that you want to do during the period of time that Mercury is retrograde. And you're probably going to find things that, the wording's bad, or, oh, I didn't know that that was a penalty fee, or something along those lines. And you want to pay attention to them. Typically, when Mercury's not retrograde, and if this isn't something that you do habitually, a lot of people would be like, oh, sign here. Okay, but during a Mercury retrograde, it's like, take a look at all of that language and make sure that you understand fully what you're agreeing to and what you're signing on for. This is what you want to do during the period of time that Mercury is retrograde, because you have to do business during this time. You don't have the option to not do it. That's something that you have to do. So if you sort of take that on, that puts you in a good stead. The other thing to keep in mind when Mercury is retrograde is to probably add 2 weeks to whatever deadline you're working with. And that's because Mercury is going to muck up, it's going to mess up your calendar, your schedule, your flight plan, your commute. Mercury rules over the day-to-day business of our lives, but Mercury also rules over commutes. Okay. And it's not long journeys or voyages, out of state or out of country. That's Jupiter, although Jupiter's in Gemini right now and is ruled by Mercury, but I'm not going to muddy the waters here. But Jupiter rules over long journeys and long voyages. Mercury rules over your commute, your day-to-day commute, getting the train, driving your car, the subway, getting Uber, your commutes and the way that your commute behaves. So during a retrograde, things can be messed up, okay? And things can take longer than you expect. And so basically going into any sort of endeavor or any sort of enterprise, knowing that it's going to take longer than you think it's going to take, that there are going to be complications. What this does, especially because you've got Mercury in the zodiac sign of Aries, Aries is ruled by Mars. Mars is named after the Roman god of war, and Mars can get angry and fuming. So if you know that going in, then you're not going to get angry and fuming. I mean, you can still have your reaction, which is, why is this happening? But then you can be like, well, things are going to not go off as planned because Mercury is retrograde. And that kind of puts you in a mindset, to sort of be like, I'm not going to get all pissy about this. And okay, here's the complication. I have to make time for the complication. Just deal with the complication right now. And as you deal with the complications and the various and sundry monkey wrenches that are going to be thrown into the works, you're going to find that you move from things aren't going as planned to getting inventive. Something gets thrown in, it's like, okay, something got thrown in. So you go back over what you did that wasn't done right, or you have to deal with what was thrown into it, and it starts to make you inventive. You may even learn. I mean, I had a situation the other day with me and the printer where it wasn't working right. It was like, but then I was like, Christopher, like, rethink. And, I worked with it or whatever, and I discovered, I don't know how I discovered, I pressed a button and I discovered that the back of the printer came off if you squeeze these two levers or whatever together, and you could actually get the jammed paper out of it. And so, I wouldn't have learned that had the paper not gotten jammed and the machine stopped cooperating. All right. So that's kind of what I want to share with you as a way of thinking during Mercury retrograde. You're going to have things jamming, not working, not functioning right. Instead of getting angry at yourself or the machine, what you do is try to figure it out. And as you try to figure it out, you're going to learn, and that's a different way of learning. And learning, of course, is associated with Mercury. So it's a wonderful way to deal with that Mercury retrograde. Instead of saying, I can't buy or sell or, whatever, you just get into that mindset of dealing with things as they crop up. And that's going to actually end up teaching you things that you probably didn't know before. Now, on March 19th, the Sun forms a conjunction to Neptune in Pisces. And this is the last time that the Sun will conjoin Neptune in Pisces in our lifetimes. Okay, this will never happen again. Okay, as long as we're like here alive on the planet, unless we're living to like 148 years old or something along those lines. All right, so this is the last time that the Sun and Pisces are going to be in the same place at the same time. And it's very important because Neptune is the modern ruler of the zodiac sign of Pisces. So when we unpack that, something that comes to mind immediately is that Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac, all right? And so things are coming to an end, or there's going to be this feeling that things are coming to an end. This could be a pervasive mood or anxiety. Things are coming to an end. It can be this feeling like maybe it's about time that things came to an end, but there's this feeling of things coming to an end. And it can be like an end, like, okay, I'm done with this, or it's the last day of a class, or it's when you move out, or it can be a denouement, which is that moment that follows the ending of a film, when it's kind of like it ends and then there's a little comment made at the end of it. So this feeling of things coming to an end is going to be very powerful. What's also powerful is Neptune ending its residence in Pisces. I mean, it will retrograde back down into Pisces in the fall of this year and then leave at the beginning of next year. But Neptune's going to move from Pisces into Aries. Before talking about Neptune in Aries, I want to address very quickly Neptune in Pisces. Neptune in Pisces, they're not easily separate ideas because Neptune is the modern ruler of Pisces. And there are so many attributes of Pisces that are connected to Neptune that one sort of just puts them together, right? Which is very Neptunian, by the way. But Neptune, I like to think of Neptune as the planet of the collective unconscious. And that comes from a term that was used by the psychotherapist Carl Jung. And what he was referencing there is that Freud talked about our subconscious and our dreams, the dreams that we have at night. And Freud's relationship to that is that, if you could unlock the dream, you could unlock that the dream was speaking to you symbolically about your own neuroses or about your own problem. And so in Freudian therapy, you would talk about your dreams and they would be interpreted in terms of like what the dream was trying to tell you about your neurotic behavior or your compulsive patterns, all right? But it was very much situated in the subconscious. It was very much situated in the personal psychological history of the person and maybe the effect that social mores or pressures were having on that person. But it was still, the subconscious of the person, my own subconscious. Like my dream is a mishmash of what went on before in my life. And if I can interpret this, I can break myself of some neurotic pattern. I can solve something. Jung took it further, all right? Jung felt that, yeah, you could dream and it has to do with your day-to-day experiences, but what are dreams really drawing from, okay? And Jung's feeling was that they were drawing from a collective unconscious, okay? So collective means everyone, okay, not just you. So you could have your own personal subconscious, like you could be your own personal person, okay? But when you got into the collective unconscious, when you dreamt at night, you were dreaming and accessing a sort of global imagination, all right? It was originally described as sort of like or if you think of Neptune, named after the Roman god of the ocean, well, oceans are made up of streams and rivers that flow into them. Okay. And so it's almost like you would go to sleep at night and your, subconscious would access or flow into this collective unconscious, which would then flow into you. And so the idea here was of archetypes, that in the collective unconscious were these archetypal symbols that all cultures recognized but interpreted differently in the context of their own culture. Like, for instance, you could have a messianic figure or a savior figure, and that would be an archetype. But Jesus isn't going to be the same as Muhammad, and it's not going to be the same as Buddha. All right. So you can have this sort of divine Messiah or this divine, savior, but, according to the culture that it shows up in, the context would be very different. So it was all about accessing the archetype, which was sort of the generating symbol. But then that generating symbol was going to be interpreted or understood in the contexts of different countries and cultures, but also it was going to be understood in the different contexts of each of our personal lives. So when we access an archetype, a symbol, which is kind of generic, it resonates with a very powerful meaning. And there's a sense of like, that you understand it, not consciously, but you understand it unconsciously, and it speaks to you. And think of how powerful symbols are. The symbol of a cross, the symbol of a moon and a crescent, the symbol of a flag. People take these things very seriously. Don't burn that flag. Don't desecrate, that sacred symbol. And so symbols are very, very powerful, and they carry with them a sort of sacredness, a sort of sacrality. The modern day version of this, or what's kind of allowed us to understand it in a more easily accessible way, is the internet. Okay, with the internet and social media, we can access into greater images, into greater narratives, into greater stories that are being told. And when the internet was first experienced, this was sort of seen as a good thing, like a global village, and people could share their stories and narratives and things like that. But what we've seen during the period of time, particularly that Neptune has been in Pisces, it entered Pisces in 2012, is that we don't know what to believe here. Images can be distorted, they can be altered, they can be faked. News can be set up, that's not fact, but then what's fact, but then what's agreed upon. So, and that's the sort of dark side of this collective unconscious. On one hand, it could be like, oh, we all understand and recognize a savior figure, and that feeling that the savior figure brings to me is so powerful and ineffable and mystical, and it makes me want to join that. But then it could also be like, here's a fable, here's a myth, here's an alternative truth, here's a fiction. But it has all the power, all the magnetism, all the allure of an archetype. And then what happens is you get into what's truth, what's fiction, and people getting extremely emotional about it, and not just emotional like I'm angry, but just it really has a powerful thing. There was a phrase that was used a lot when I was growing up in the 1970s, which was something in the water was the phrase. It was this idea that someone put something in the water, that they had laced the water with some sort of, I don't know, drug or amphetamine or something like that. And it's almost like this is what Neptune does. It sort of releases this energy into the zodiac sign that it's traveling through. And here with Pisces, we know that Pisces can be associated with a redemption, with the knowledge that every saint was once a sinner. These are things that are wound up in Pisces. But what Pisces also carries with it is a very dark pessimism and even a sort of apocalyptic fantasy. It's the last zodiac sign. Okay, so everything comes to an end, in Pisces. And even if you think of Noah's Ark and the flood, God wiping out the world with the flood to get rid of the stain, to get rid of, what was toxic and pollutant. Only to realize that it will just grow back. So that's not going to work. But anyway, that idea of things coming to an end, of things just being out of control, of not knowing what to believe, where a symbol becomes a trigger. Or you have symbol, you have trigger, and maybe a symbol triggers or a trigger symbolizes, this is what's going on. So this is very, very powerful. It's in our unconscious, okay, because of in the way that we've been able to access, on social medias and things like that. So that's something that's coming to an end, and that's going to shift and change its flavor when Neptune enters the zodiac sign of Aries. But this is certainly something that we're all experiencing right now. This I don't know what to trust. I want my mystical experience back. I want, this thing that resonates within me. Maybe that is what it really is. All of these questions are very Neptune in Pisces, because it's all of a swirl and you don't really know what's up or down or what's left or right. So what's happened basically with Neptune and Pisces is that the collective unconscious has overrun its banks. It's gotten too big and it's overrun its banks into our conscious life and our conscious world. And we're trying to figure that out right now. And that has reached an apex or a climax with this Sun-Neptune conjunction in Pisces. On the day after March 19th, the Sun is conjoined Neptune in the zodiac sign of Pisces. On the day after, the very day after, which is March 20th, the Sun enters the zodiac sign of Aries. All right. And that's a big switch of energy. Okay. We're going from water to fire. We're going from end to beginning. Okay, because Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. Aries, because of its association with the spring equinox, marked the beginning of an agricultural year here in the Northern Hemisphere. And so there's that sense of like a new beginning, which is something that we all feel every year at this time in the Northern Hemisphere. And the reason why I underline Northern Hemisphere is because astrology, Western astrology at least, originates in the Northern Hemisphere. And so when we're talking about an agricultural calendar, which is very much caught up in the character of each one of the zodiac signs, this is why I say here in the Northern Hemisphere. So a spring equinox for us here in the Northern Hemisphere is the beginning of the agricultural year. And as I said, we experience this whenever the Sun comes into Aries. So no sooner does the Sun come into the zodiac sign of Aries than there is a solar eclipse on March 29th. And so with the solar eclipse, what you have is that you have the Sun in the sky here, and the Moon moves in front of it and blocks its light. That's a solar eclipse. And if you're in a part of the world where the solar eclipse is visible, it's going to be a very dramatic and very memorable experience. But for a lot of us, we're not in a part of the world where it's visible. But nevertheless, astrology records this event taking place, where you've got the Sun in the sky and then the Moon moves in front of it. What happens here is that the light is being blocked out in the sky of Sun. And so that was also a very alarming experience if you happen to be able to see that back in the day and you weren't always sure. And ancient civilizations talked about this as to whether the Sun was going to come back or not, okay? And there was a feeling that during a solar eclipse, when the Moon blocked the rays of the Sun, that dark forces were being unleashed into the world. And so that's where a solar eclipse has its kind of nefarious type of energy. With the solar eclipse blocking the face of the Sun in the zodiac sign of Aries, that says a couple of things. First is that this is the last of the solar eclipses taking place in the zodiac signs of Aries and Libra. So everyone born under Aries and Libra, or if you have Aries and Libra rising, you can say, thank goodness, last one. Okay, no more, and this is a good thing. But eclipses also talk about a radical change in direction can be taking place. And so this one's very potent. Okay, the sun is in the zodiac sign of Aries. It's carrying a lot of energy with it. The sun is exalted in the zodiac sign of Aries, and it's being eclipsed. And so there's kind of this I need to shine, type of push-pull and struggle that's going on. So this eclipse could bring a very dramatic departure of events. We thought things were going one way, and now they're going to go somewhere else. This is certainly going to be supported by Mercury and Venus both having turned retrograde originally in the zodiac sign of Aries. All right, so this could be a very tumultuous period of time. And then what follows this is Neptune entering the zodiac sign of Aries on March 30th. We have the eclipse on March 29th, and then we have Neptune entering Aries on March 30th, the day after. So what's Neptune in Aries going to be? Well, it's going to be a lot of things, and it's very complex, but let's bring it up to one idea. Basically, the idea that I would want to share with you with Neptune entering into the zodiac sign of Aries is fresh future, or at least the belief in a fresh future. That's basically what the stars are mapping out here. We have the collapse of things coming undone. We hear this a lot, these days, which is, get rid of what's old and doesn't work and do something radically different and new. There's a lot of Marsy energy about this. I don't know where we're going with shaking things up and breaking things down, but at least we're going somewhere. At least there's action. This is very Mars, if you hear it, type of energy. But the thing is, you have to have a plan. You can't just rip things down and that's it. There has to be a plan here. And with the Neptune moving into the Aries and following the eclipse, we're going to start getting an idea of where all of this energy is going. Now, why are we going to start getting an idea of where all of this energy is going? What I want you to focus on here are three ideas. The sun, which is in Aries, Neptune, which is in Aries after March 30th, right? And Mars, the ruler of Aries, okay, we began with Mars and we're still tracking Mars. So just sort of keep that in your back pocket here. Mercury comes out of retrograde in the zodiac sign of Pisces. It went from Aries to Pisces, the sign behind Aries. Okay, so Mercury stops moving backwards on April 7th, moves forward and re-enters Aries on April 16th, where it conjoins Neptune in Aries. And that's interesting because we're dealing with the sun and Neptune. Neptune can be that collective unconscious that I was talking about. It's also your vision of the future. Visions can either be diluted or they can be inspired, and inspired visions have done a lot to change the world and for the better. All right, so Mercury re-enters Aries on April 16th, where it conjoins Neptune in Aries. But what makes this positive is that Mars, the planet that rules Aries, enters the zodiac sign of Leo on April 18th, which is the day that follows that conjunction of Mercury and Neptune in Aries. This is very powerful because remember that the sun is exalted, meaning most celebrated, in the zodiac sign of Aries. It's like that because when the sun shows up in Aries, we know that spring has sprung, and this is good, that the old year is over, the new year is beginning, fresh life and growth is growing again. Okay, and so this is why the sun is exalted, meaning most celebrated in the zodiac sign of Aries. This is where we feel like the sun is the most joyful. All right, so here the sun is in Aries, which is the zodiac sign of its exaltation, celebration. And at this point, on April 18th, Mars, which rules Aries, has entered Leo. Okay, and what planet rules Leo? The sun, which is exalted, most celebrated in Aries. Yes, this is as good as it sounds. Okay, this is a wonderful thing. So not only is Mercury back on track again, it's out of retrograde, so you can go back to buying and selling, or at least feeling like you could buy and sell with some kind of confidence. Not only is Mercury back on track again, but it gets an extra boost in Aries because now Mars has entered Leo. Got to keep this all going. Mars has entered Leo, which comes back to the Sun in Aries. So everything in Aries is turning its gaze towards the sun, and it's heading in a positive direction. So not only are things back on track with Mercury going direct again, but now that Mercury's in Aries and Mars has just moved into Leo on April 18th, you're going to have a sense of like, okay, this is all making sense. I know where things are going. The sun has risen on a new day, and what this is also going to do, because a lunar eclipse can deal with health issues or working issues. So when you experience that lunar eclipse in Virgo, you might also have had like health issues or difficulties at work. Now that Mercury, which rules that lunar eclipse that took place in Virgo, now that it's moving forward, it's in Aries, it's very optimistic and things are moving together. People are kind of optimistic about resolving their differences. Now, Venus comes out of retrograde on April 12th, but remember that she retrograded back down into the zodiac sign of Pisces. Venus doesn't re-enter Aries until April 30th, okay? And she conjoins Neptune on May 2nd. But what I really want you to look out for here is Venus forming a trine to Mars on May 22nd. Okay. Venus is in Aries. She's ruled by Mars, which is in Leo. They form a trine. And this is a good thing. Trines always bring good things. So do sextiles, but trines bring good things. So this trine between Venus and Mars taking place on May 22nd, that should bring about some resolution to what went wrong when Venus turned retrograde all the way back on March 1st. So issues that erupted came forth, broken treaties, broken trust, broken truces. These should actually be resolved. I'm not saying they're going to be resolved right on May 22nd, but certainly in the days leading up to May 22nd, I should see that happening. And then what also happens on May 22nd is that the sun, and remember the sun and Neptune, I said keep your eyes on Sun and Neptune. The Sun and Neptune form a sextile on May 22nd. Something that's just as good as a trine, in my opinion, better, is a sextile. And so here we have a sextile taking place between the Neptune in Aries and the Sun in Gemini on the very same day that Venus forms a trine to Mars. Venus in Aries forms a trine to Mars in Leo. It ultimately goes to or will genuflect to the Sun and the Neptune sextile. And this is wonderful because what's nice about this is that it's really about resolving the differences in a chummy way, okay? It's not like resolution, like this has been resolved or whatever, but it's more chummy, it's more friendly because of the nature of Gemini. Gemini has this way of sort of breaking the ice, of getting people to laugh at something, to sort of be chummy again. And with these two planetary events taking place on the same day, which is May 22nd, I see that as actually being good. Now, I know I threw a lot of things at you, but what I wanted to demonstrate to you is that what can begin with bumper cars, and it looks like it's a calamity, when you begin to look at the separate planets in play, it's not just good day, bad day with astrology. We're dealing with planets that are in play. So this whole thing begins with planets as bumper cars. But as we go through what I described, the planets kind of move from this bumper car thing to an alignment where where things had been torn or ripped. Now they're being mended and they're being sewn back together, but in new ways that are different. and in new ways that are not only different, but inspiring for heading in a new direction. Now, there's still Mars element. So there's still, a sort of, robust and combustible and incendiary element. But what's coming into play here are things that can also be along the lines of good sportsmanship or people, transferring a combat into a contest. Instead of it being combative, now it's going to become a contest, and now we're going to find our way to being more camaraderie, more friendly to one another. We went through these spills and these feuds, and now we're finding something which might be a workable situation. And certainly with this alignment of planets, it's looking much more optimistic than pessimistic. But again, this is my way of saying that when we sort of unknot, the planets begin very knotted, but then when we sort of disentangle the different strands, we can see that there's not only a design, but there's also a direction that we're headed in, where things where things will make sense. But not only that, where it will really inspire each of us to embrace the higher angels of ourselves rather than the lower demons.